Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hacking with Friends. Today, we're going to be talking about mistakes that businesses make, and I have my friend and coworker on, Killian, who's going to expound on some of these things. Killian, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me again, Cody. I'm looking forward to it. Should be fun.
So this is a little bit of a sensitive topic because while a lot of businesses would probably benefit from these stories, most of them don't ever want to admit that they have done something wrong. So we're not going to be calling out specific businesses today, and it is important to note that all the businesses we're talking about today are not Verona's customers, so under no circumstances should you infer that one of them is. However, these mistakes are universal enough that there are probably going to be some people who think we might be talking about them. So just realize that the mistakes we're talking about today are widespread, super common, and we see them all the time as security professionals. So we're going to dive into what these mistakes are, why they're made, and hopefully some ways that we can help remedy them. So, Killian, this topic is probably one of my favorites just because of how many stories I have from working in the industry. What kind of mistakes do you think are the most important for businesses to be able to spot?
Oh man, I have a lot off the top of my head. A lot of password ones, but I think maybe the one that I see the most, at least most commonly now, is integrating technology without really understanding it. So, hey, we found this cool new thing, or the executive got this brand new whatchamacallit, wants to hook it up to the corporate network. We can't say no, so let's plug it in and see what happens. So, and then I know you love Wi-Fi, so we see a lot of weird things with Wi-Fi, especially working from home now too, and everybody being at home on their Wi-Fi network. I think we could probably even have many episodes on that one. So, pick your poison.
Definitely. And there's a lot of different types of breaches that are out there in the news right now. You hear about ransomware, you hear about major data breaches, and you kind of wonder, like, where did someone slip up or what actually happened that caused this? And a lot of the times you never find out, or, the news comes out years later when everyone's already kind of moved on. So there are some really big data breaches and some really news-breaking events that have happened because of the mistakes that we're going to be talking about today. And as Killian mentioned, one of the most common ones is just basically bringing stuff into your business that you don't fully understand. And I'm going to give a couple examples that are going to horrify you. So one day I was in a doctor's office for an appointment, and I was on my phone waiting, and I noticed that there was a well-known brand of security camera broadcasting an open Wi-Fi network. And I thought, that's odd. So I joined this open Wi-Fi network it was broadcasting. I downloaded the app that goes along with this device, and I found that it just instantly connected to the security camera, which was in another doctor's office. And people were discussing private healthcare information. They were basically doing billing stuff, receiving diagnoses, calling patients. It was horrific because this camera was open to anybody in the area. And because they decided they needed a security camera and they never bothered to set up the Wi-Fi configuration, they basically just hardwired it in like they would an old school security camera and didn't realize this is a smart device. There's all these features that they're not using, and because it wasn't made adequately clear to them, they just left part of the device set up so that anybody could configure it. And I find this is the case also with routers, other things that people bring into their business that are cool and maybe help expand some functionality, but also maybe have features that make them vulnerable if you don't understand them. Now, another example that I hate, because this is just something that a lot of businesses have no control over, is small businesses in various areas who are trying to sign up with a bigger provider. Maybe it's DoorDash, maybe it's whatever. And they're trying to integrate with a partner, but that partner sends over a device to them that maybe is configured in a way that isn't all the way secure, or the business doesn't know enough about it to use it in a secure fashion. So if you bring a piece of technology that's now managing credit cards and all this other sort of stuff, connect it to your business's network, and you don't understand anything about the way it was configured, this might seem like it's a good thing to, get a free piece of hardware, with a deal or something like that. But if it's set up in a way that makes your business less secure, this could actually represent a threat.
Absolutely. I know that this is something we've talked about before on the show, and one of my favorite things is just going on Shodan. It's so easy to search for some of these open devices that have been connected directly to the public internet to find the security cameras, to find these things. Don't do it. Please don't go and look at that stuff. Just a word to the audience. Let's respect their privacy and help try and educate some people. But it's very common to find these things that are hooked up like that. I know even on the production of the show, myself and our show producers have talked about how we're going to handle with the remote people to do, live stream events and things like that. And we keep thinking, wouldn't it be great to just send somebody a pre-configured box with a camera and with everything you need to remotely monitor it? But that's always a scary thing that we come back to is we could probably rig it up. We could probably do something, but we don't want to open that up for the whole world and do it securely. So that's a real fear that I think a lot of businesses will probably face too, especially if you're trying to get executives, trying to get non-technical people to participate in web meetings and things like that. It's really tempting to just send them or ship them something that's pre-configured to hook up to their network for this type of stuff.
So, okay, Killian, that's a great point, because I was discussing some things that are like physical problems where like if you're close enough to this like sketchy doctor's office, suddenly you can hear the billing information of patients.
Right.
But there's also problems where someone might get a device that they think is this really cool IoT device, they plug it in their network, and then, they're somewhere else configuring it on their phone, and they're like, hey, wait, how can I connect to this thing on my phone? I'm not on my Wi-Fi anymore. And you realize at a certain point, like, wait, this camera must be connected to a server somewhere.
Right.
Who can access that?
Yeah.
Can everybody access that? Do I have any control over who can access that? And those are the kind of questions that lead you to somebody watching your stupid camera on Shodan because its default setting is to just be wide open. And maybe there's instructions on setting it up properly that you didn't see. Maybe they're in Chinese because you got it on AliExpress. And in some cases, I've seen IoT devices that have a manufacturer installed very powerful firmware, and then they have another layer of software that's put on by like somebody who bought it and rebranded it, and then they'll have another layer on top of that. So 3 layers deep, there are configuration settings that the average casual user just doesn't have access to. That's not really the fault of the user, but here's a quick tip for being able to tell if your IoT device is outside of your network potentially broadcasting. If you can control your IoT device from outside of your Wi-Fi network, it is open somewhere. It might be locked down enough that only you can access it if it's a high quality, like business that does this and has been subject to scrutiny over privacy concerns. But if it's just some random Chinese manufacturer, there's no incentive to go the extra mile to keep your data private or secure. So if you're putting one of these IoT devices that has a speaker or a camera in an area that's sensitive, or if you're just connecting it to a sensitive network in general, then you could be giving up more than you're intending. Just kind of think like, if I'm able to interact with this device offside my network, that means that somebody else must be brokering that connection. And that's where you can end up with a Shodan type situation with exposed webcams or microphones or other things that are leaking information you don't want to be leaked.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so this leads me into Internet of Things devices in general. And I love these because they generally rely on Wi-Fi. That's my bag. I love messing with them. But there are serious problems when you start connecting these in critical ways to a business. So let's say that you have cameras that absolutely never can be turned off. This is a big problem if you're relying on Wi-Fi cameras that can be jammed. Let's say that you have payment processing things, like right now Stripe payments and some of those other manufacturers that have like a payment processor in-house. Those are super popular, and businesses can adopt technologies like that to their heart's content. Some of them are off-brand and cheaper that might not use the same type of security. So, all right, so my example of this is a music venue makes thousands and thousands of dollars every couple of minutes at a full capacity with a bar that's being slammed. It makes a ton of money. So I was conducting an audit and I said, hey, you guys have your payment processing system on the same network as the network you give out to bands. So any random band that plays at this venue gets the Wi-Fi password, and then it's kind of all on the same network. It's flat, as you said. So the problem here is I talked to the manager and was like, this means that any one of these bands or anybody who has this password can interact with your payment processing devices. Like, do you see how that, could be problematic? And they're just like, and they said, they shut me down, case closed. It doesn't matter. The traffic is encrypted. Okay. So I was like, may I demonstrate this piece? Like, go ahead, sure. Like, you're not going to be able to read any information. So on an Android phone, I pressed a button. The network reconfigured itself to see my Android phone as the center of the network. And then I started dropping connections. And suddenly they were losing thousands of dollars every minute because they were no longer able to process credit card transactions, because all the credit card processors thought my phone was the router, and my phone was not allowing any connection to go through. So I was basically able to demonstrate that any one of these bands on an Android phone, which by the way wasn't rooted or anything, could basically take over this network and shut down their payment processing. And of course, it alarmed them because they thought these IoT devices where you could slap them on the network. The person that sold them to them said, hey, it's encrypted, nothing to worry about. But they didn't consider that by sharing a network and by throwing all these IoT devices on the same network as that they were just giving out to people, that this could cause a devastating turn of events. So an interesting case study in why the problem you don't think about is the one that gets you. The bottom line is like, having a breach would be bad, but going out of business because you can't sell any drinks at the bar, that is actually a way bigger concern when it comes up, even if it's not the one that jumps out at you as like the biggest thing to be afraid of. And it's like, okay, I need to secure these credit card transactions, but can you always ensure the ability to run them? If you can't, you don't have a viable business. So yeah, this is also something that leads into my next topic, which was shared public Wi-Fi networks. So coffee shops are particularly guilty of this, but really any like restaurants or any smaller business that provides internet access to their customers and doesn't segment it from the rest of their network. And this is all about network segmentation basically, but if you have one flat network for everybody, it means that anybody can scan it. So one of my favorite things is if I'm at a coffee shop and they're using a Sonos and they're providing, internet that's not segmented, you can just go on the Sonos app and change it. And it will identify the Sonos device on the network, and you can progressively put in like, more and more spicy or potentially offensive rap music. And like the coffee shop people are like, wow, this channel is really like kicking it off tonight. And then like the swearing comes in, they're like, what is going on? And it's really difficult to tell that someone is manipulating your device. And of course, this is just like, this is just messing around because I wanted to change the music. But it could be much more severe if this is like the DVR or something that actually has more sensitive information. And I will say that 9 times out of 10, if you have a network with cameras on it and a DVR on it, it's all on the same network if they're just providing a flat network of this sort. So they could have like an offline DVR or something, but many times these businesses choose not to. And because of that, you have all these problems we just talked about combined. You have devices that they haven't configured, so they have default passwords. You have the ability for anybody on the network to see and interact with them because it's not segmented, meaning that they can try to break into these devices, like their router, maybe put a back door. I hear cases, there was a bunch of news, this is almost a decade ago, I think, in Seattle about people who would take over routers and then sell a VPN to criminals to run stolen credit cards through. So, if you have an Internet of Things device, like a router, that provides an internet connection, that's a valuable asset. If you're just allowing random people to, knock on its door and potentially break into it because you haven't changed the password from password, then, you're basically inviting, you're just like, wow, the internet's so slow today. Well, maybe it's because a bunch of random, Eastern Europeans are running stolen credit cards through it, and you don't know because, you never set your password. It's hard for the average person to assess these sort of risks if you don't know that, hey, wait, my internet connection in and of itself is an asset. It's a resource. And if I leave it wide open to anybody who can log in and maybe configure a backdoor, configure a VPN to log into this router remotely, then I could be creating a situation where, the FBI knocks on my door, is like, hey, there's a lot of sketchy internet traffic coming from your business. It's like, why? Oh, and I have a great story for that.
Well, you brought up a good point, though, that I just wanted to address really quick, is everybody thinks about security, or at least a lot of normal people think about it as keeping the bad guys out. But in that exact situation, you're inviting the bad guys inside. They're inside your perimeter at that point, really. In all of those cases where Wi-Fi is available like that. So, even if you're hardening the outside, once they're connected to your Wi-Fi there, they could get access to the management interface if it has the default password, even if that's disabled and the remote management's disabled. They're on the inside.
And they're using your resources. They're basically using your resources to hide their identity. So,
I'm sorry, what was your story?
Oh, well, it leads perfectly into that. So, Killian, who is the worst person or worst group you could think of to break into your router and use its resources for something nefarious?
Oh, no.
Give me 3.
I don't want to upset anybody on the internet who's gonna try and break into my Wi-Fi.
Come on, nation states, please. Nation states, please.
Well, of course we're gonna talk about North Korea. We're gonna talk.
That's it. That was it. Okay, so I have a story about North Korea and Wi-Fi. So I was one time working at a fashion association, and one of the buildings that they worked with, because there were many, many fashion buildings in downtown LA,
Yep.
had a really interesting breach, and I got actually to speak to the person who responded to it. So what happened was this building had a client, a fashion showroom that gave out their Wi-Fi password to anybody that would come in. And they had a bunch of people who were saying that they were going for job interviews and stuff at nearby businesses who would actually just come in, get the Wi-Fi password, and use it. So it was kind of an open secret that you could just use this very strong Wi-Fi that they had in the center of the building. Now, at some point, somebody reconfigured the router to allow remote access. And this was noticed by North Korean hackers who identified the router and breached it and then used it as a proxy for the Sony attack. So the FBI called this building manager and said, and the interesting case is this building was basically sort of acting as its own internet service provider. They were basically contacted and said, you need to shut down all the internet in the entire building. This was like 100 businesses were going to be cut off from the internet. And they're like, absolutely not. Why? They're like, well, there is an act of terrorism that is happening, and your business is right now looking like it is the one that is sending the offending packets.
You don't want that call.
No, you absolutely do not. So this is my favorite thing about this story. Fashion people do not care about tech stuff. So they thought this was hilarious. So they're like, okay, so they shut it down for a day. They explained everybody had a laugh. Like they took their orders offline or whatever. Some money was lost. A couple people were upset, but the next day they were back up and running. The FBI took their computers and they were just like, well, that was crazy. Like the takeaway wasn't like, wow, we really need to lock stuff down. They're just like, isn't it crazy that this stuff could happen? So
I mean, it is crazy that this stuff could happen, but
yeah, no, it was a pretty wild story, and this just goes to show that this feeds into some of the stuff we're going to talk about later, which is like physical access control in a building where there's so many people around, and you have a bad password, you don't know who's accessing it. But in some cases also, I find that even more advanced businesses, my next topic is they don't use VPNs. So if you have a network that is relatively robust, but your employees aren't using VPNs, or you're not using a VPN, the problem is anybody can start to manipulate that traffic who's on the same local network as you. So if any of the problems before apply to you, you're using a shared network, you're on a network that might have been breached, you're out at a coffee shop, whatever. If you're not 100% sure about the other people on your network, if you're not alone out there or don't trust everyone on your network, not using a VPN creates a problem, because somebody can serve you a phishing page. They can look at your DNS requests, see which websites you're going to, craft a phishing page that's actually practical, and send it to you. It's like there's lots of information you're giving up as soon as you are on a shared connection with someone who's watching or trying to manipulate the traffic. So using a VPN locks them out of that in a way that, as a hacker that's focused on Wi-Fi, makes their traffic a lot less interesting to me, because I have to go through way more work in order to actually get information out of it.
So real quick, just maybe some people are starting off in the security world or looking for tips to get their small business a little bit more up to speed. What would you recommend that they do to address some of these Wi-Fi issues or the kind of insider issues when dealing with shared Wi-Fi?
So segmented networks, or having a VLAN, is really important. Making sure that if you have people on one section of the network, it's kind of a permissions-based thing. Should some random person who's connecting to the free Wi-Fi be able to port scan your security cameras? If the answer is no, then you might need to take a look at your network infrastructure and make sure your security cameras are kept as far away from the people you don't want port scanning them as possible, on a completely separate network or on a virtual VLAN that doesn't allow communication between different network segments. So if you have that going on and you make sure that people cannot connect to your sensitive networks that have everything configured, it's also the next step of making sure that you take a look at so you take an account, an audit of all the devices on your network.
Right.
You knock on the front door. You say, all right, have I set this up correctly? Are there any passwords here that I haven't changed? Are there any settings that are wide open that I need to lock down? And once you check those things off, you're probably okay in terms of just taking some of the most basic attacks off the table, that the lowest common, if I'm bored at a coffee shop and I can look through your security cameras without even providing a password, I'm going to do it. Because it's not even illegal. At a certain point, if you just leave your stuff open, people are just going to, be on your network and be like, what is this? So
Right.
you're really, if you make yourself a little bit more difficult than the next
Mm-hmm.
business over to break into, or to see your entire network, or
Mm-hmm.
watch people swipe their credit cards by a poorly placed security camera. And these are all really, really easy to solve mistakes just by taking an audit of all of
Mm-hmm.
your IoT devices or all the devices on your network, making sure none of them are open, and then making sure your network configuration, your network topography makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, it sounds like we have some pretty good advice for both businesses that can segment the network, and even potentially for end users is, hey, at work, or hopefully your work machine, if you're going out there, make sure you run your VPN, or get a personal VPN for your phone, or your, whatever you happen to be carrying. Um, that's I as a matter of principle don't connect to any free Wi-Fi. I will use the one bar of my cell phone signal if I have to, and I'll still run a VPN. But
Yeah. It's
paranoia.
worth it. It's worth it because, for privacy advocates,
Mm-hmm.
some people are shocked to find out that your internet service provider really isn't under very many
Right.
under very much pressure to keep your private data private. So if you want to keep your browsing private, if you don't want random people at the coffee shop snooping on you, if you don't want a data breach from your internet service provider to leak all your records or whatever, then this is just a common sense thing you can do that keeps you a little bit more secure from those threats. Now, if your VPN is to turn evil on you,
Well,
then you've got other problems. But at
Right.
least you've moved, multiple problems to one thing you can focus on and make a
Right.
decision based on the company, the service that's provided, the speed, all that stuff.
And I mean, and that's a great point. Even at home, a lot of service providers now monetize your browsing. If they control the DNS, they'll sell who's looking up what to folks. So even using a VPN at home on your connection could help alleviate that a little bit if you're concerned about your ISP potentially selling some of your information as well too.
Yes, and as soon as you do that, you'll also realize how much advertisers track you. Because as soon as I turn my VPN off, I get hyper local advertising. That's not only tuned to my internet behavior, but also the region I'm in and what it
Yep.
expects people in my region to like. So as soon as you have a VPN on that just confuses it with an IP address that doesn't make sense to it, you're going to notice that a lot of those hyper personal ads go away, or
Right.
they become so hopelessly mistargeted that you're just like, what is this? And you just scroll right past it. So I think that, by mixing up your IP address to provide more security, that's its own privacy benefit. But also just keeping your information secure in transit. If you're on one of these networks you don't trust, well, the first thing I do if I connect to a network I don't completely trust is pop on a VPN every time. It's just a smart thing to do. Not all businesses like that.
Sure.
I know that certain businesses don't allow you to log in with a VPN because it might trigger some of their security protocols.
Right.
So you have to weigh the convenience versus the security. But it is still a really good practice to be in just using a VPN when you're on an untrusted network.
Absolutely.
All right, so I have a story about trying to do everything that we just mentioned and failing. All right, so there was a business, a donut shop even,
Okay.
in Los Angeles. There are many.
Yes.
And they provided free Wi-Fi to their customers, and they had a segmented network. Good for them, right?
All right. We're
That
off to a
is
good
so
start.
smart. Yes. So they had security cameras kind of everywhere. Those cameras were connected to their network. Not a good idea. And you could also see through those cameras if you were on the same network. But they segmented their network. So theoretically, none of that stuff should matter. And their password for that other network, big and long. So
Nice.
what could possibly go wrong? So the one thing that possibly went wrong was they didn't knock on their doors. They didn't really go around and check out these devices. Because if they had, they would have seen that if you were to go onto the free Wi-Fi, you could still see the router. And if you were to
Okay.
go to the IP address of the router, it provides a status message telling you the status of every network that the router is currently providing, which
Oh.
for absolutely no reason includes the password of every one of the networks that the router is creating, including the segmented network that has all the private stuff on it. So if you then copy and paste this password, which again, anybody on the open Wi-Fi network, anybody on the street can go and see by going to the IP address of the router, you just connect to the secure network and suddenly
Right.
you are lord of the cameras. And you can not only see through all the cameras, you can watch the employees in the back, you can watch customers swiping their credit cards and putting in their PIN numbers. Why would you put the camera there? Seems like a stupid move. So that kind of setup is so close to being okay.
Right.
Like you're so close to not doing a terrible job. But yet, one
Right.
small mistake like that, it's like if you're going to try to provide security and then there's a web page on your local network that completely circumvents that anybody who can do any sort of scan or at least determine a network range can discover, then
Right.
you're just still making yourself a really easy target for no reason. So
Right.
I'm just gonna say, if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna like take a look at your devices, if you're gonna try to segment your network, try it out after. A lot of people are
Yeah.
like, why do we need hackers? It's like, well, if no one ever tests your network configuration
Right.
and something is wrong, how are you gonna know that until there's a rash of customers who get their pins stolen? You're like, I wonder why this camera is right above the pin machine. Yeah,
Right.
like so these are things that seem common sense, but
Right.
if I hadn't gone to that IP address, then I wouldn't have known that. I compulsively go to IP addresses that I find on networks just to see what's there, because that's what I do. But this is kind of an argument for having anybody who can
Right.
operate like the Thing app or something else to just scan stuff on your network and see if any ports are open or if there's any information being disclosed that undermines the security of your entire network.
And I think even it's even better sometimes to have somebody external or a third party do it, or somebody you trust that's not you to do it, because you might have gone through every one of those steps, and I bet you the security guy at this coffee place, or the donut place, excuse me, thought of it. Hey, I'm going to segment this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this big long password. He probably went through, and it's the thing that he didn't think about. Even in non-security world, with me, one of the things that I do is help create some of the demo material that we have. And, I'll go through this big list and I'll come up with all these things to test. And then every once in a while I'll go, hey, did you know XYZ isn't there? And it's something that I've never thought about. No one's ever asked me about before. And I go, huh. Well, they go, why not? And I go, because no one's ever told me. Like, I'm happy to fix it and we'll take care of it right away. But it's one of those things that you just need to tell people sometimes. Try it.
Yeah. And a lot of people just don't know that they don't know.
Right.
It makes sense. It's common sense, but unless it's happened to you, or unless it's
Right.
something that like actually you're aware of as a problem, like it's just hard to know about.
Maybe that's the best advice we could give to any security people or aspiring security people is you have to realize and internalize the only thing you know is how little you really know.
Yeah, security is so big that you're never going to be like
Right.
an expert on everything. There's just too much. And like you kind of find stuff that makes sense to you, become a specialist in the things that you really like, and try to be enough of a generalist to understand like broad things. And that's kind of the best way I feel like to
Right.
go about trying to learn this sort of stuff, because man, it's so hard to learn all this stuff. There's so many like little things that you didn't quite know about, but at least knowing the basics allows you
Right.
to prevent, a business you work for, your own business, or even just your own personal information from being the lowest hanging fruit.
Absolutely. I would never claim to be a Wi-Fi expert, but I watched your other episodes of your show. We've had we talked about some of the conferences, seeing the Wi-Fi hacking demonstration that you did. And I forget, it was one of the shows we did a couple weeks ago. You mentioned something about, and I wish I could remember it because I'm totally screwing this up now. But it might have been with like geolocation or something. Oh, we were talking about Wi-Fi. And you said, with the conferences, you're like, make sure you turn off the assisted GPS
Assisted
with
GPS.
I'm like, wow, I totally didn't even think of that. I always flip off my stuff in airplane mode, but that's one thing that it didn't dawn on me until you said it, and I'm paranoid about this stuff. So this is a perfect example.
Do you know what was necessary for you to learn that information? I had to be in a completely radio silent storm drain tunnel in Los Angeles testing radio signals on a laptop and be like, hey, I told you guys to flip your phones on airplane mode. And they're like, we did. I was like, it's still broadcasting. They're like, we did. And then as soon as we went through and turned that off, it's like, oh, it stopped. And then I went and looked it up and it was just like, oh, that's what that was. But like if I wasn't doing like weird, obscure radio testing with Wi-Fi to just like see what happens when you're in a radio isolated environment, never would have learned it. So knowledge comes from truly strange places sometimes. But for privacy nuts, it's good to know that, your phone might be leaking information when you think you've turned it off. When you turn off Wi-Fi, when you turn on airplane mode and it's still sending frames, like that's sketchy to some people.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
For us, we just used it to detect when taggers were also in the tunnels. But, for normal people, it's weird. All right, so another thing we can lean into is password protecting networks with bad passwords and just passwords in general. So we talked about segmenting networks and keeping them secure. We've also talked about having good passwords, but there are some real life examples I've seen of bad passwords that can really come back to haunt you. So one example, was a film house. And this was not a
Okay.
film house that I was associated with. This was a film house that was near a doctor's office I went to. And you might notice a recurring theme of me being in waiting rooms and trying to hack stuff. So there was a nearby doctor's office who there was a nearby film studio who basically, the long story short, they had a password that was integrity. And then I think like another word or something very, very short. It was a principle that they wanted to instill upon everyone who was given access to their Wi-Fi network. But the problem was that in addition to this, they had this secure network that also had all of their production assets on it. So rather than segmenting them, rather than putting them anywhere that is maybe a little bit better, I was able to, just by listening in on nearby handshakes, identify that this network had a seriously weak Wi-Fi network password. I spoke to them and they're like, oh, well, that's actually where we keep all of our stuff. So they had multiple servers sitting on this, that anybody who had that password, and again, this was, I was testing out a tool in the lobby that basically looks for Wi-Fi handshakes of devices connecting and checks to see if it's in the list of like the top 10,000 worst passwords.
Right.
Because they had one of the top 10,000 worst passwords, it meant that anybody who knows anything about Wi-Fi hacking, who wants to get into this network, could destroy with ransomware or whatever else all their production assets for this big film studio just because they set a bad password on a network. And this password never changed. This password had been this way for years and years and years and years, and every employee knew it. Every person who had been in that office that had to ask to use it temporarily knew it. And that's why having a secure network behind a gate with like a toothpick through it instead of a lock, like that is not, even if your network topography is keeping people to their own segment, it's not going to help you.
Absolutely. And I've seen stories, I've heard other colleagues and coworkers in the field talk about just how easy it is to unlock the door with that bad password. And if you think about just some of the basics there, again, this is not customers, this is just kind of generally talking to people in the industry and things like that, but seeing just really basic stuff like complexity requirements. We all hate the uppercase, lowercase, blah blah blah. Those are terrible anyway, for being honest. You just have to make a really, 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 really long password. It's more secure, and it's sometimes easier to remember. But just having that, just the length or the complexity requirements, will go a long way to alleviate this. Again, maybe they could have had integrity, good virtue, be nice to everybody, be excellent to each other, whatever you want to.
Poem, something just varied enough that like it wasn't something that was in a standard dictionary, just two words stuck together.
And as you mentioned, not changing it. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that have been in that exact same boat. Oh yeah, we've had this password forever. We made it complex, but it's the one that we've been using for 10 years now.
Oh my gosh. If I can't tell you how many businesses, big businesses too, are like worshiping this legacy password. It's like, this is the best password anyone could have created. Some people are in the myth of like, oh, I need a good password. So they pick one. And then they drag this password through like a decade of internet accounts. It's just like, oh, no, my password's the best. They like brag about it. It's like, my password's 32 characters. It goes on forever. It's just like, how long have you had this password for? 10 years. How many accounts have you signed up for? Like 100? It's like, have you been to Have I Been Pwned?
Right.
Are you sure that this password hasn't already been breached multiple times, that everybody has it already? Oh, wait, that happens? It's like, yeah, buddy. Yeah, if you don't change your password and you use it all the time, then someone else is going to breach it, and they're not going to tell you until their PR department tells them to tell you. So for you, that means that you're left exposed and all of your accounts are just basically a sitting duck if they use the same email and password combination, which a lot of people do. A lot of businesses do that.
That's a huge one too, and I'm glad you brought up. It's just that password reuse is, Have I Been Pwned is a great one. And great free tip to everybody. A lot of the password managers, if you don't have one, get one. And a lot of them will tell you when you go to put it in, hey, did you know you reuse this password somewhere else?
Yes, I
appreciate that.
I had to spend an entire afternoon because 1Password, which by the way is free for press, so if any press are listening or if anyone writes blogs or whatever, they'll just give you a free 1Password account. But 1Password will check the hash of your password against a list of common passwords and will be like, hey, this is in a breached password list. You got to do something about this. So if you pick a password that has been breached, it will literally warn you which I think is fantastic. It'll
I
warn you
love that.
against reuse. So if
Yep.
you're using it in multiple accounts, and it'll also reuse you against breaches. So it's probably, I think one of the best ways of knowing if one of your passwords has been breached is putting it in a password manager and having it continually search to make sure that, hey, like this hasn't been breached.
Absolutely, and it's a real easy, like you said, there's ways if you press or whatever to get it at a reduced cost, but even I pay for it, and I got the family plan to make sure all of the rest of my family, because I don't want to have that call, well, what happened? I'd rather just pay for it up front, get everybody to use the password thing, so I don't have to explain to mom, dad, and grandma, like, let it generate it for you, let it fill it in for you.
You can share them too. Like
Right.
the password managers, especially if you have like the professional version, like allows you to share groups of passwords. So in our business, we have like groups that we share passwords in for
Right.
employees and stuff. It just makes it easier to manage these passwords, change them regularly. And if you're using secure passwords and it's updated appropriately, then it makes it a lot easier to have a password that's just insane. That's just no one's ever going to crack, and that's rotated in a way that is resistant to data breaches. And if they're all unique and they're all rotating somewhat regularly, and you're alerted when there's one that's been out there for too long, that's pretty much the best thing I think a normal person can do without really going like kind of overboard on their own security.
Right. And I mean, and even in businesses, I know a lot of businesses have some IAM solutions will do that. There are dedicated authentication solutions that will help do that for the business. I don't. Just Okta, for example, off the top of my head, I just popped out. They'll help with some of that management of applications, so you don't have to create passwords for all of those things too, which is a nice solution for businesses and small businesses. Of course, you can, I'm sure, get a business account for one password for your employees too, which was a nice value add for security.
Yeah, definitely.
So going beyond passwords, Cody, I wanted to ask you, what other things could people do to secure their accounts?
All right. I have to tell you a story that makes me insane. Okay. So this is also the only business that I'm going to identify in this entire cast, just because it's no longer, the association's no longer an association. It's been dissolved. And also I love these ladies who work there, and there's no way that they're going to sue me. So big shout out to Francis and everybody else that worked at the FBI with me. So a couple of summers ago, I was working with the FBI. And by that I mean the Fashion Business Inc., which is an association that was designed to help fashion startups. Now, fashion businesses are, and I'll say this politely, an absolute mess when it comes to security because they are trying their hardest to get these products out the door. They are hardcore into logistics and like the global economy. These people have their plate full when it comes to dealing with competition while also fulfilling orders. It's a tough job.
Oh, absolutely. Sounds like it.
So I was trying to help out and advise them, with just little security things. And they laid this story on me that I was not prepared for. So they're like, every once in a while, we have this guy in our system who knows our passwords. We don't know how he got them, and it's because they all shared passwords. But because they didn't have any sort of like two-factor or like any way of telling when somebody else was logging in that wasn't them, this random dude from another country had gained access to their email accounts, was reading all their emails, and about twice a year would launch a ham-handed phishing attack against them, posing as somebody else in the organization. So like one of the ladies who's 2 doors down would supposedly email the other one in broken English, demanding that an invoice be paid to an offshore bank account that no one had ever heard of for an amount of money that was obscene. And then, of course, when Lady B would come out of her office and walk over to Lady A and be like, "Hey, did you write this email?" And the Lady B would be like, "No, I didn't." They'd be like, "It's that guy again." And they treated it as this like funny. It's just like this guy lives in our system. We can't get him out. He tries every once in a while. They kind of like felt bad for the guy because like he was just so like he wasn't getting away with anything. Everybody knew it was him. Like he couldn't figure out what to do with the access. They couldn't figure out how to get rid of him. It's just like turn on 2FA. Like what are you doing? Like so like I was just like you just accept the fact that this man lives in your business system. And like periodically like attempts to rob you digitally, and like it's just like a funny like a coffee story, and they're just like, what are you gonna do? And it's like I have to admire their toughness because they never let this guy get them. They stood up to this man in their system every day, but they just did it. They were so busy and they had so much stuff going on, like sitting down and figuring out like what do we do with this guy who bothers us every like 8 months? Like it just wasn't as big of a priority. So that might horrify security experts. And for me, I was just like, you guys are operating on a level that I didn't know existed. But like some of these common sense things for businesses that share passwords, that make other mistakes, there are fail safes. And one of them is 2FA.
Yes,
so 2FA
absolutely.
means that even if your password gets out there, it doesn't mean that every person with your password can get into your account. They have to prove that either they have access to your cell phone, your phone number, an authenticator app, something. So after begging, I believe that eventually the FBI implemented 2FA, and my heart goes out to them because, yes, I don't know how they dealt with that for such a long time. But it was really funny that, a little implementation of something like a 2FA token would have completely eliminated this problem. And it was just, a lack of awareness of the way that they could be using these products to just make it a little bit more secure. So a lot of businesses could benefit from, if you have a highly secure environment and you want to lock it down, I use physical security keys that I use to authenticate a new device to my account. So theoretically, you should only need to use it once when you're adding a device to your account, and then after that, you can access it normally. But if you're, in Sri Lanka or something, trying to log into this guy's account, and you don't have this physical security token, you not, get access to his phone number or whatever, but actually this physical security token, then you're kind of out of luck. Now, there have been breaches of, a 2FA that's over phone. And one thing I saw on Twitter that I thought was kind of funny was like, if you're receiving your 2FA request on the same device you're making the request on, it's not really 2FA. So keep that in mind. If everything ties back to the same device and you're accessing everything on it, then you're kind of creating a single point of failure. But at the very least, you are making yourself less of a low-hanging fruit when it comes to just anybody with your password being able to get into your account.
And I think that maybe will be the underlying theme here. Is there simple changes that you can make to make yourself just that much less desirable of a target? I know I'm pretty lazy. I don't want to go through the trouble if to go compromise your phone and get you have a physical token, but if you're getting the text message and do all that stuff, when you could pop on an open Wi-Fi network at the coffee shop and just get the credit card information and the PIN right from the camera. That's also not to say, and I recommend everybody has 2FA, absolutely 100%. Don't get lulled into a false sense of security, because I've talked to plenty of people that say, I've got 2FA, nothing could ever happen to me. Sounds like your friends at the FBI probably could have used some auditing and monitoring to see where this guy was coming from. In addition to that, because there are ways around it too, as you said, but it's layers of defense, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we've talked about both types of attacks: remote attacks that are caused by passwords being breached, but also local attacks that are caused by devices just being misconfigured. So our next topic is physical controls, and this can apply both to network topography, where maybe you have some Ethernet ports where they're not supposed to be, or Wi-Fi networks where you have a Wi-Fi network that's maybe open on the second floor because you assume that no one can get up there, but also anybody with a directional Wi-Fi antenna can just connect to your network from the next building over. So there are some mistakes that are made when it comes to physical access controls, or making sure that devices are kind of like an assumption that obscurity equals security when it comes to like hiding something. My favorite example is there is a broadcasting station in California somewhere that has an open Wi-Fi network directly connected to the industrial grade antennas that are capable of broadcasting for like hundreds and hundreds of miles. So if you happen to just be in the area, which is publicly accessible, and there's plenty of reasons why normal people go to that area, then you can just connect to that Wi-Fi. And I myself was just using open Wi-Fi to write a resume, but I happened to notice while I was writing my resume that there was also all these things that should not have been accessible also on the network. And as soon as I began scanning, I instantly got kicked out by the firewall, and like I was no longer able to join the network. But I never should have been able to join the network to begin with. And there shouldn't have been an open Wi-Fi network that basically says, hey, if you want internet, here you go. To a normal person, an open Wi-Fi network means you can connect to this. And,
Right.
as far as I'm aware, there's no laws around, just connecting to an open Wi-Fi network that's not marked somewhere that it's restricted.
Right.
So just providing open free Wi-Fi, that's a nice move, but you should also make sure that
Mm-hmm.
physical distance isn't your only security mechanism. Because assuming that no one's going to get close to this
Right.
network and be able to connect to it is a huge mistake. And there's a lot of businesses that could benefit from this point of view. That if you have something that's relying on physical access control, and then you're not fully able to execute that, either because it's a radio signal, how are you going to
Right.
box that in? Or it's an Ethernet cable. Killian, I think you had a good story. I'm not sure if you can tell about just Ethernet ports being accessible in
Right.
waiting rooms and in other areas that are considered to be outside the secure area that connect back to a network topography that allows you complete access. So
Yeah.
physical control also means not having like a USB port coming
Right.
out of the back of the monitor of your receptionist's desk, where they turn around to fax something and anybody can plug in a device into it. Like there's a way of thinking about how to access a network or how to access a computer that starts with just looking for holes in the security
Right.
based on where you're allowed to be. So if you take the perspective of an outsider, look at what areas of your business you can either access remotely via Wi-Fi or access physically in like a waiting room or like an adjunct like building or area
Right.
that has like the same network connection. Like these are all different areas where a lot of businesses end up messing up and
Right.
creating a pretty secure perimeter with one giant gaping hole that draws immediate attention.
Well, I mean, just think about it. Imagine, and this is not a specific example of anybody, but think about how many buildings now are wired for Ethernet, pre-wired. You have all of these different connections all over the place. When you hook it back up to your switch or your internal network, if you don't even know where those ports go, you could be exposing yourself. Or it's deliberate. You have a kiosk out there, and you thought, okay, we don't want to use Wi-Fi. We're going to physically wire it in. If one or more ports are open on there, we could just take the port off of the kiosk. Or like you said, if the kiosk is not locked down, you can plug something into it. You see that you go into a lot of places that do, and this is again not a specific example, but you think of places that you would have set up for AV, like a conference center or a school maybe. Again, not a specific example, but those are designed to be shared and publicly. Hey, you want to come and do this presentation? You plug your thing into the computer that we have under the table. It presents to our AV equipment. Seems like a pretty easy way to get in if it's connected to the main network.
You wouldn't believe how many networks like that. Whenever I talk to like a young hacker, someone who's like still in high school, that's like maybe gotten in trouble for hacking their school or something, they're always just like, yeah, it's just the fact that these are set up to be so easy to have access to everything that for someone like me who knows a little bit about how to traverse a network, it's just it's simple, it's easy. In fact, it's almost boringly easy. I was like, wow. So yeah, that's a big factor in keeping networks secure is just realizing how many holes there are in them and how many different points of access there are that you should try to control if you want to keep your network properly segmented or prevent your computer from having a rubber ducky stuck in it.
And I think that maybe leads to my biggest area of passion, my biggest area of concern is just once you have somebody inside on your network somehow, the only thing you have standing between them potentially and all of your important stuff is whatever access controls you have set up on the file server, right?
Absolutely.
And I can talk about this for ages and days and weeks, but think about in security here, and Kody, you have the background, and anybody listening, security through obscurity is not security at all. So if you just say, hey, no one's going to get to my file server, totally cool, don't know what the permissions are set on it. Think about the person that gets that ransomware attack, right? And I know we've talked about this, and Kody, I think we talked the other day, and you were talking about doing some ransomware stuff.
Oh yeah, I spent all yesterday writing ransomware.
So there you go. What does that take advantage of? The fact that someone has a machine that has it, but it could easily spread to the network. Think about all of your map drives. We're not in the office anymore, but those remote network drives, it can easily expand. Or if we think about a couple years ago with the NSA ones that expanded to the file servers through the one of the blue exploits.
Eternal Blue.
Eternal Blue, that's it. If some of these devices aren't locked down, or if you don't have least permission or least privilege set up, any random old person on the network, or maybe not even authenticated to the network, could steal that data potentially, or B, just wipe it out. And then it becomes a damage mitigation strategy, really. The odds someone's going to click on something, get phished and maybe launch some ransomware. If you have good backups, you can recover. If it's one person and, maybe, their personal drive or some other, department share. But if you have global access groups or, the everyone group, authenticated users, if they're authenticated, applied to the ACLs, you could wipe out, your entire NAS or volumes or file servers at that point. So that's what keeps me up at night, at least in my role in life, I guess.
When I explain to people what Varonis does, and like I'm especially non-technical people, and like usually explaining a security product, they're just like, I have no idea what this does or why it's important. But like explaining the portion of just like least privilege and like, hey, if you're some random person that just joined a company, should you have access to absolutely everything? It's like, well, of course not. It was like, well, then why does your business do that? Right. Like, okay, a story, I can't name this business, but I was at one point part of a giant company that was very, very paranoid and was just like, you can't come to this meeting. It's secure. Like, no, you can't see this. But they allowed, via Google Drive, access to the meeting notes for all of these secret meetings in real time. So even if you weren't invited to the meeting, you could just access the document that they were writing in the meeting and get a better experience than actually being in the meeting. So like a lot of these businesses kind of do like security theater where like they'll restrict things or whatever. But when it comes to least privilege, it's like, what actual access does this person have to the network? And if their account were to go rogue, why in the hell do they have the ability to access this, that, and the other when their job is doing this, this, and this? And if they need to access that, we're not going to like restrict them from doing it forever. It's just like if it's unusual behavior and it's the stuff they never usually access and it's sensitive, why wouldn't I want to know about that? So just taking the average user and taking a look at their permissions and being like, if this person was to mess up and click on a bad link, what's the worst thing that could happen? Just asking that question makes a huge amount of sense for your business. No matter how you're looking at mitigating that risk, the newest least important member of your business having the same access as like a manager or an administrator or even close to the same level of access, that is not okay, because it just means you're setting yourself up for one person making an innocent mistake, having huge repercussions. And who do you get mad at? The person who gave them permissions? That's probably you.
Oh yeah. It's like, locking not locking your front door and letting your house open. People can wander in and out if they wanted to. You got to have layers of control. Maybe don't get as, I don't know, maybe in your house, Cody, you lock every door in the house and you only give certain people keys to the production area. You know what I mean? But,
I wish. Everyone has two strong personalities in this house. They'd burst through the door. So one thing, okay, so this leads into our next topic really well, which is you can go too far. If you start treating your employees as the enemy, or if you start getting too paranoid, you can over surveil your business to the point that you end up exposing it anyway. So this is, so I have a story from the fashion business again. This was someone I was called into their fashion warehouse because they were convinced someone was hacking them and they needed to figure out what was going on. So I go in, there's security cameras absolutely everywhere. And all of these security cameras are connected directly to the internet so that the owner can obsessively watch all the time. He basically wants to watch all of his employees. Not only are they connected, they're connected with the password username root login tour.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I can put that in my password manager.
So if you go to Shodan, you were able to not only like look at every single camera from this guy's business, you were basically able to like watch over the shoulder of this incredibly paranoid manager. So if I'm a hacker, this is everything I'm looking for. I have one guy who's exposed. By the way, the reason he did all this is he wanted to keep his location secret, but actually he was just broadcasting his location to everybody on the internet. So you really, if you go too far with this stuff and you start installing systems you don't fully understand, you start trying to make it so that everything is remotely accessible and whatever, you can end up with a circumstance where you have a bunch of tech in your business working against your stated goals of keeping you secure that are actually broadcasting your internal operations to your competition when you're trying to have a secret location. So I wish that man the best in his quest to have a secret layer. But it's just really not going to happen in a lot of cases where you just overcompensate in that way.
The other thing that I see too, before we get too off topic, is and this is again not a specific example of anybody, but I think a lot of people in the industry can probably relate, is you put so many security controls in place and you lock so much down, but you overly secure without giving users a way to do what they need to do. So what are they going to do? They're going to find their own way to do it. Yep. And we see that so much with the shadow IT and things like that, is without some mitigated control. You know, and I say this to everybody, and I say this when we go to trade shows. Businesses are in business to make money, to do their job. They're not in business to secure things, right?
No, it's a loss center in their head until they realize that it's not.
But there is a way to secure things while still making sure that the users can do what they need to do, but do it in a way that's still secure. So if you can kind of gently guide them where they need to go, you know, if they need to share with, you know, external parties, whatever reason, you know, maybe in the fashion industry, they have to share designs with people. Give them a way to be able to share securely, you know, be it OneDrive or Box or whatever it happens to be, but do it in a way that you can help them control it, still monitor it, still make sure that you're figuring out what they're doing and auditing it for abuse, but give them a way to do that they can use, as opposed to saying you can't do anything. And then what are they going to do? They're going to sign up for their own personal account. They're going to, you know.
The fastest way. So if you throw a single security control at like a fashion industry worker who like doesn't want to deal with it, they just quickly switch to Google and type, "How do I install unlicensed software as admin?" And it's like, then you've got that situation going on. So like if you thought that like them sharing incorrectly was a problem, just wait until you try to block them from doing their jobs. All right, so we're running out of time, but I have one last one that I want to mention, and this is a tough one for businesses big and small, and that is failure to disclose a breach.
Okay.
So this is something where, like, if you're sick and you're coughing on other people, you're not being responsible. And the business I'm going to talk about today was a logistics business that, surprise, surprise, was in the fashion industry. And I'd warned them many times that they had some issues. I had moved on to a new job where I hadn't heard from them for maybe like 2 years or so. I'm in the security job, and all of a sudden, I just, boom, ransomware in my inbox. I get an email from them that says, "You need to pay this outstanding invoice," typos. And at the bottom, there's a PDF, clearly malicious. Bring it over to VirusTotal, not messing around. Like, this thing is definitely malware. So I call them on the phone. I'm like, "Hey, here's a funny story. You guys just sent me a virus." And they're just like, "Oh, no. We just had an email prank." And I was like, I need to talk to the boss right now. Like, I don't know who you are, but like the fact that you just blasted every one of your suppliers with malware. And these are people that don't understand technology. These are people that are vulnerable. These are your business partners. These are the people that are your livelihood. You just blasted every single one of them with something that is going to infect a percentage of them. And you are responsible if you do not tell them that. And he's just like, "I'm pretty sure it's a goof," and hung up. So eventually I got in touch with the boss, and it's just like, "You need to call the police." And he's just like, "What?" And I was just like, "No, you need to call the police." He's like, "This is a prank." It's like, no. You just attacked all of your customers.
Right.
You need to call the police.
Yeah.
So, I hope, and I set him up with like an incident response team, and like, but it was shocking to this business that they bore any responsibility for what happened next to their customers, to their business partners. They did not understand initially that this wasn't something they could just shrug off. And the damage, the economic damage they were wreaking on their own suppliers, the people that trusted them, was the worst part of all this. Because yes, they had terrible security, but some of these other people had good security. Some of them, didn't deserve to be breached just because they trusted this business, and that trust was exploited. So just realize your trust can always be exploited in a way that can cause catastrophic problems if you don't step up to the plate and advocate for your customers, advocate for your business partners, and at least make sure they have the information necessary to defend themselves. Of course, I understand nobody wants to get sued. Nobody wants to be like, "Hey, we got breached. Sorry, guys, your information's out there. Screw us, right? Bye." Like, that's not a good PR strategy. But leaving your customers in the dark or downplaying a breach to make people who just got a virus feel like they can like open it and it's gonna have like a funny prank in it, like that is not gonna help anybody. So failure to disclose a breach, like, it's a tough subject. And I like to think of Sands, honestly. Like, they got breached recently, and they made a case study out of it, which is the best PR move I've ever heard. because fortunately they're an educational institution, so
Right.
it kind of goes with their thing. But if you can turn a breach into an educational
Mm-hmm.
and like learning moment where you're able
Right.
to implement changes that it will prevent it, you're able to educate your customers, like that is where you can get away with having a breach without being a horrible company.
Right.
Not saying this business was a horrible company. They corrected themselves, but their initial
Yeah.
response was so wrong because they were ignorant. They didn't know what the scale of what had just happened, that this can happen to a lot of different businesses that aren't super tech savvy or super security focused.
And that's maybe one of the biggest takeaways too, is that it can happen to anybody. Sands, I love Sands. They have such great information, but as you said, they handled it in the right way. Hey, we had a problem. Hey, here's what we have. Here's what happened. Here's the post-mortem analysis. Here's what we learned from it. Here's what you can learn from it. And that's not even taking into account regulated businesses who might have a breach. That could put you afoul of all sorts of regulations. GDPR, CCPA. There are new ones coming out regularly where they've built that in. Like, if you have a breach, or if you think you do, or if you can't prove that you didn't, you have to still disclose it to the right authorities and work through that process. And it's not, it's obviously it's the right thing to do to disclose it to your customers, but there are bigger ramifications sometimes too that we hear a lot.
Definitely, man. So we covered a lot of stuff today. I feel like we've I didn't mean to shame a lot of businesses, but I hope that we've, for consumers or for people that are in businesses, shed some light on some of the things we've seen as security professionals that come up all the time when businesses take on technology that either they don't understand or might not be configured completely correctly. Now, if you have some stories about different businesses you've seen misconfigured, we obviously can't be too specific. However, we would love to hear about other examples. Maybe we'll do another show on how to correct these sorts of things. But if you want to let us know in the comments, or you can head over to my Twitter where this will be pinned at least for a couple days, and let me know in a tweet there. My Twitter is @CodyKinsey, and I would love to hear some more wacky stories of business misadventures in security. But hopefully you've also learned from some of the remedies that we've provided today. And just maybe make your system a little bit more secure today if you learn anything from all this.
Sounds good. Hopefully some folks got something good out of this.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again, Killian, for lending your experience to this discussion. I feel like I learned a lot about some of these businesses, especially their problems that I've never personally encountered. And I'm looking forward to another one of these when we
Absolutely.
When we talk next. So
thank you for sharing the wild stories. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Anytime. All right, guys. Well,
Cool.
Thank you for joining us today. If you want to check out this, it will be recorded, and you can see it on the YouTube channel, which is Security Forward, Security FWD. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.
Thanks. Take care.